When I moved into Oak Ridge Estates, I thought I was settling into a peaceful neighborhood. The houses were pristine, the lawns perfectly manicured, and the streets quiet. It was everything I had hoped for. But I quickly learned that this so-called paradise was actually a kingdom, and its ruler was a man named Howard Langley, the HOA president who thought he was a king. Howard had been in charge of the Homeowners Association for over a decade. No one knew exactly how long he had been in power, but every attempt to vote him out mysteriously failed. The board was made up of his close friends, all of them just as drunk on power as he was. At first, I didn't pay much attention to the HOA. I figured, as long as I followed the rules, I wouldn't have any issues. But I was wrong. The first fine arrived just 2 weeks after I moved in. Violation notice. Your mailbox is not in compliance with HOA regulations. Fine. $250. Confused, I inspected my mailbox. It was the same style and color as everyone else's. When I called the HOA office, I was given a vague response about updated aesthetic standards. I asked for documentation proving that my mailbox was out of compliance, but they refused to provide it. Annoyed, I decided to just pay the fine and move on. A month later, another violation arrived. Violation notice. Lawn edging does not meet HOA specifications. Fine. $500. This time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I attended the next HOA meeting, hoping to get answers. That was when I saw firsthand how Howard Langley operated. The meeting wasn't a discussion. It was a performance. Howard sat at the front of the room like a king on his throne, his board members flanking him like royal advisors. Any homeowner who dared to challenge him was quickly silenced. When I brought up my fines and asked for clarification, he smirked and said, "The rules are in place for a reason. If you don't like them, you're welcome to move." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak against him. That's when I realized this wasn't an HOA. This was a dictatorship. Over the next few months, I started noticing more and more of Howard's abuses of power. Neighbors were being fined for the most ridiculous things: porch lights that were too bright, wind chimes that were too loud, even garden decorations that were aesthetic violations. Meanwhile, Howard and his friends openly violated the rules they enforced on everyone else. His lawn was overgrown, his driveway covered in oil stains, and yet no violations ever came his way. I started talking to other homeowners, asking if they had experienced similar issues. What I discovered shocked me. Howard had been running the HOA like his personal kingdom for years. He manipulated the voting process to keep himself in power, dismissed any challenges to his authority, and fined homeowners into submission. He had even forced a few people to sell their homes after drowning them in so many fines that they couldn't afford to stay. That's when I decided Howard had to go. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed to rally the homeowners, expose Howard's corruption, and take back our neighborhood. And for the first time in years, people were ready to fight back. Howard Langley had ruled Oak Ridge Estates like a king for years, but now his reign was in danger. Homeowners were tired of the endless fines, the intimidation, and the blatant hypocrisy. The problem was, most people were too afraid to challenge him. He had built a system that ensured no one could fight back. Until now, I spent weeks gathering evidence. I talked to residents, collected copies of their violation notices, and dug into the HOA's financial records. What I found was worse than I imagined. Howard wasn't just issuing unfair fines. He was pocketing the money. The HOA fees we paid were supposed to go toward community maintenance, but according to the records, most of the funds went to vague administrative costs. In reality, Howard had been using HOA money for personal expenses, landscaping for his own home, dinners at high-end restaurants, and even vacations. Once I had enough evidence, I reached out to my neighbors. We held secret meetings, discussing our plan to remove Howard from power. Many were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation. "What if he fines us more?" one woman asked. "Or threatens foreclosure," another added. But we all knew we had no choice. If we didn't stop him, he would continue draining us dry. The first step was exposing his corruption. We compiled a detailed report outlining every instance of financial mismanagement, every unfair fine, and every way Howard had abused his position. Then we sent it to every homeowner in the neighborhood. The reaction was immediate. People were outraged. Homeowners who had previously stayed silent started speaking out. Stories of harassment, intimidation, and wrongful fines flooded in. The once frightened community had found its voice. Howard must have sensed what was coming because the retaliation was swift. Within days, new violations appeared on doors across the neighborhood. Residents who had never received a fine before were suddenly being penalized for minor or non-existent infractions. My own house was hit the hardest. 3 separate violations in 1 week. It was clear he was trying to scare us into submission, but instead of backing down, it only made people angrier. We filed a formal petition to recall Howard Langley from his position as HOA president. According to the bylaws, if we could collect signatures from at least 60% of homeowners, we could force a vote to remove him. Howard, of course, fought back. He claimed the petition was invalid, that the signatures weren't legitimate. He held an emergency HOA meeting to try to discredit us, but this time he didn't control the room. We did. One by one, residents stood up, demanding answers. "Why are we being fined for rules that don't exist?" someone shouted. "Where is all the HOA money going?" another asked. Howard tried to talk his way out of it, but the more he spoke, the more obvious it became. He was lying. Then we revealed the final piece of evidence. Howard's secret bank transactions. One of the homeowners, a former accountant, had traced thousands of dollars in HOA funds directly to Howard's personal accounts. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. The proof was undeniable. Howard Langley wasn't just corrupt. He was a thief. I looked around the room and saw something I had never seen before. Fear in Howard's eyes. He knew his time was up. But we weren't done yet. It was time to take him down for good. The moment Howard Langley saw the proof of his embezzlement, his confident facade cracked. He stammered, trying to dismiss the evidence as misinterpretations and clerical errors, but no one in the room was buying it. The homeowners had suffered under his rule for too long, and now they had him cornered. The next step was the recall vote. Our petition had gathered over 70% of homeowners' signatures, far more than the 60% required. Howard tried to stall, claiming procedural delays, but with media attention growing and city officials now aware of the situation, he was out of options. The vote was scheduled for the following week, but Howard wasn't going down without a fight. In the days leading up to the vote, he launched a desperate smear campaign. Flyers appeared on doorsteps accusing me and other homeowners leading the charge of being troublemakers, trying to destroy the community. Emails were sent claiming that if Howard was removed, property values would plummet and the neighborhood would fall into chaos. It didn't work. Homeowners saw through the lies. The very people he had fined, harassed, and threatened for years weren't about to let him scare them anymore. The vote proceeded as planned. On the night of the recall, the community center was packed. Howard sat at the front, his usual smug expression replaced with a tight-lipped scowl. The process was simple. Each homeowner would cast their vote. Keep Howard or remove him. The tension was thick as ballots were collected and counted. When the results were announced, the room erupted in cheers. Howard Langley had been officially removed as HOA president by an overwhelming majority. His reign was over, but there was one final consequence he didn't see coming. As the crowd celebrated, a city official stepped forward. Given the financial misconduct uncovered in the HOA's records, Mr. Langley is now under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Howard's face went pale. He tried to stand up and protest, but the official continued. Until further notice, all HOA funds will be frozen, and a full audit will be conducted. The homeowners had won. The days that followed were like waking up from a bad dream. The new HOA board, made up of actual homeowners, not Howard's lackeys, immediately reversed the unjust fines, refunded stolen money, and rewrote the bylaws to prevent another abuse of power. Homeowners who had once lived in fear of receiving another violation notice could finally breathe again. As for Howard Langley, he disappeared overnight. Rumors swirled that he had fled the state to avoid charges, but no one really cared where he went. Oak Ridge Estates was finally free of its self-proclaimed king. Standing outside my home that evening, watching neighbors gather and chat without the cloud of HOA tyranny hanging over them, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. We had taken back our community. We had proven that even against corrupt leadership, homeowners have the power to fight back. And we had won. No HOA president should ever think they are above the people they serve. Howard Langley learned that the hard way. The fall of Howard Langley sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge Estates. Homeowners who had once lived in fear were now stepping forward, sharing their stories, and reclaiming their neighborhood. The HOA board, once a tool of oppression, was undergoing a complete overhaul. For the first time in over a decade, people felt like they actually had a voice. But while Howard was gone, his mess remained. The new HOA board quickly discovered just how deep his corruption ran. The community's reserve fund, money meant for maintenance and repairs, had been drained. The previous board had covered up missing funds with bogus invoices and fake expenses, all while forcing homeowners to foot the bill through endless fines. The damage was worse than we had expected. It took months to untangle the financial disaster Howard had left behind. The HOA's new leadership worked closely with auditors and legal teams to track every stolen dollar. Some funds had been siphoned into personal accounts, others funneled through shell companies. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Then the final blow came: criminal charges. After months of investigation, state prosecutors formally charged Howard Langley with fraud, embezzlement, and financial misconduct. Evidence showed that over $300,000 had been illegally taken from HOA funds. Not only that, but he had also rigged HOA elections for years, ensuring he remained in power by disqualifying homeowners he saw as a threat. When the news broke, the homeowners gathered in celebration. Howard Langley had once ruled over us like a king, but now he was facing real consequences. With Howard out of the picture, Oak Ridge Estates began to heal. The abusive fines were eliminated, fair regulations were put in place, and trust between the HOA and homeowners was slowly rebuilt. The new leadership ensured transparency. No more secret meetings, no more unexplained fines, and no more unchecked power. One evening, as I walked through the neighborhood, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: people smiling. Neighbors who once feared retaliation from the HOA were outside talking. Kids were playing without the worry of receiving a violation notice, and the community felt alive again. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about Howard Langley. This was about power, corruption, and the importance of standing up for what's right. We had learned a valuable lesson. HOAs are meant to serve homeowners, not control them. And if leadership ever oversteps again, we now know exactly what to do. Oak Ridge Estates was no longer ruled by a tyrant. It was finally a community again. And that was the greatest victory of all.